Okay, so thank you so very much for joining. Um, and we had today's mobilization of knowledge and discussions on knowledge mobilization as a whole. And we had rewriting the narrative on homelessness in mid-sized Canadian cities. We had addressing homelessness in Kelowna, establishing participatory action research priorities. And we had post-pandemic learnings about knowledge dissemination. So we have some really great questions here, and I'll go all the way back to the thank you so very first much. Question here, which asks, and I believe this is directed at the first presenter, Carrie, if you just want to confirm, but the question is, how did you go about getting the information you used in your study? What kinds of outreach did you use, and what kinds of stakeholders did you connect with?
Yeah, thanks for that question. This is where I really wish Pete had been able to be here, and I think really speaks to the challenges that come with people who with lived experience doing this work, but continuing to live in really precarious situations. But just really briefly, sorry, the feedback is distracting. We really relied on Pete and our other peer facilitators. They were key members of our team, and they directed us to how to reach out to people, the best organizations that they felt comfortable with to act as collaborators and partners with us, in ways that made sense for that community and for the people with lived experience of homelessness in that city. And so we were newcomers to that city, and so we really relied on our peer facilitators. Very briefly, though, we spoke with people with lived experience of homelessness, other community members, so community associations. We tried to speak to some businesses, the BIA, things like that, and then law enforcement. What we ended up finding out is that bylaw was a much bigger problem. Lived experts told us that bylaw was the bigger problem than police, and they were not willing to cooperate, but we did get to speak with police.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And then the next question is from Erin, and the question is for Steph. And the question is, how do you balance the need to discuss complex and often nuanced issues within something as short form as an infographic, especially if it's the preferred method? So Erin shares that a research team that they are on has been struggling with this, especially as we work to ensure that the voices of lived experts are prioritized. So the Kelowna team may have some suggestions as well.
Yeah, Erin, that's a really great question. I know something we've worked on with you in the past as well, trying to, feel out what the right imagery and content should be for an infographic. It's always a challenge. So we always have to go back to thinking about what's the most plain language way to say something. What does our audience need to know? So what would resonate with them? What would be most attention grabbing and most informative to them? So really thinking about what it is that they need to get out of the research, not so much what we want to tell. So really keeping that in mind when we're creating this content. But then it also goes back to that layering I mentioned where, yes, we have an infographic, but it may be a series of infographics to really get the message across or tell the story of the work. And then there's other ways to do it where we saw earlier in the presentations how powerful quotes can be. So sometimes those can be overlapped on the infographic as well. So it's not just sharing data, it's sharing the voices of the folks you're working with. So it's a combination of all of these tactics just to really get your message out. We never just rely on, that infographic or that one social media post. We really do rely on all these various tools to get this content and messaging out there.
Thank you, Steph. And I'm going to repeat the question just in case the Kelowna team also has suggestions to add. But the question was, how do you balance the need to discuss complex and often nuanced issues with something as short form as an infographic, especially as a preferred method? So does the Kelowna team have any recommendations there?
Infographics are great. We used for parts of our project and parts of the work that's going on here, we were able to use things like having a graphic illustrator. So that can really tell a lot of a story. It can be a background or a backdrop or a side panel that you have that complements things in your infographic. So those are really great pieces. And I'll just touch on one more thing that's tangentially related to this question, but making sure that you're also thinking about the raw data that you have. So knowledge mobilization is getting it out into the hands of people, but there are other pieces of information that you're collecting through your research that has applicability in other places too. So we want to think about when we're pulling in that data, are those stories that you're collecting something that can be useful to service providers in other ways? Is there concrete quantitative data that you're pulling in as well that could then be, if it's appropriate, utilized and shared with service providers or policymakers in other ways. And so sometimes it's that consolidation, the sharing of the raw information where appropriate, which can also move and change what's happening in your communities, not just the actual outputs that we have to. And that can sometimes be tough to wrap your head around, that someone else might need what you have developed, because you can't always anticipate what other people are needing.
Thank you so much for that. The next question is from, but where are the Google Doc templates located? May connect to what Lindsay has posted and shared in the live chat.
Yeah, exactly. So I just shared a link with everyone. That's where you can find links to all the graphic design tools that I mentioned, and then the templates for the social media and knowledge mobilization planning. So you can find them all there.
Amazing, thank you. And that is all the questions that we have in the question or the Q&A section. Does anybody have any other questions before we move on from today's excellent presentations? Wonderful. So I just want to say thank you again to all of our presenters. It's been wonderful. And I'm actually going to, in the live chat session, I'm going to copy paste some points that I found on. So thank you for being here. Thank you again to our presenters. I hope you enjoy the rest of.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.